many of you in the room today, which is very exciting. But we have a lot to get through. So let's get it going. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Christy Crawford, to kick us off.
So that's Melissa, our queen of AI. Again, we say welcome for Beyond Access, right? So this is CS for All Equity and the KPOR Center Responsible AI and Tech Justice webinar. So on this team for computer science education, you've met me, you've met Melissa, you might not have met some other folks, but we do want to tell you a little bit about Computer Science for All, or New York City's Computer Science Education Department, before we get started. We are a tiny team of computer scientists and former teachers who are just here to serve kids, especially kids who have been historically excluded from the CS classroom, particularly girls and Black and Latinx students. What you might not know about CS for All is that we've always integrated computer science into K-6, into 712, but what's new with this new mayor is bright starts and bold futures. So what we mean is that 100,000 kids will have in-depth experiences in career-connected pathways, including internships and apprenticeships and high-growth CS fields. But for today's event, to kick you off, we're so happy you're here. We're just going to talk about AI and some of its limitations. You will hear all about Melissa's AI magic. We're going to jump into responsible AI together. You'll get an insider take from Shana White. That's Shana White on your screen. We're really excited to have Shana as our keynote speaker today. She's the director of CS Equity Initiatives at the KPOR Center. If you haven't heard about the KPOR Center, we say, what's going on? That is the spot nationwide when we talk about equity and CS. So the KPOR Center has released a responsible AI guide that's great for you, that's great for the families of the kids you teach and your kids. So we'll jump into it. But for today's event, if you are very excited about Melissa's AI magic or about Shana's work on that responsible AI guide, we say share it. Go to hashtag CS for All NYC or NYC Schools, and of course, the KPOR Center. So here's Melissa.
Hello again. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Melissa Mejias Parker, and I work with the fabulous Christy Crawford on Computer Science for All's Equitable Practices team. So we're going to start today with just a little bit about what is AI. It's going to be super quick. I know some of you have already attended AI literacy sessions this morning, so it's going to be like a nice little review. But again, what we always do is we're pushing that criticality piece. So we'll talk a little more about that. Something that I just want to brag about really quickly is that this year was the first year, the inaugural year of our Equity and AI cohort. We had around 30 to 40 teachers that participated and ran like truly remarkable AI literacy events in their school. And we're going to be showing those off on our CS for All Equity website. So Val, if you can drop that in the chat, and this is also the link to the website is shared in the deck, but definitely go in there and check those out because they did amazing work. So let's talk a little bit about what is AI. Here is one definition of AI, just one. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is when a computer program or machine is able to do tasks that are usually done by humans. A classic example is the self-driving car, which we already have in our society, for better or worse, right? And we have cars now that can kind of take what are typically human perceptions, sight, hearing, logic, using our brains, and use like mechanical sensors, like radars, like LiDAR, using cameras, computer vision in order to make those decisions, right? That is actually really complex, right? You might think of driving as easy, but it's a very complex kind of task. However, something that I want to point out is that there is not one agreed upon definition for artificial intelligence. It actually varies, right? So this is one example and one way to think about it, but there isn't agreement in the community. And so it's still like being discussed. What are we really talking about when we're talking about AI? Another way to think about it, instead of as a strict definition, is to think about it in terms of goals. What is the goal of AI? And for some, that's for a computer to match or even exceed human intelligence, right? For example, humans have the ability to discover, to find out new information, to infer, to intuit information that's subtextual, it's not explicitly stated, and to use reason, right? We use logic to figure things out. But again, there are limitations here, right? Like intelligence is not limited to human intelligence. A really great example that was brought up in the Equity and AI PD is think about fish like salmon that that they breed in a stream and then go out to sea for many years, and then those salmon are able to use an intelligence to swim all the way back from the ocean to where they began, to the breeding grounds, right? That's a kind of intelligence that we as humans don't have. So there are a lot of different ways to think about what intelligence is. And another thing that I want to point out is that even the term AI, artificial intelligence, is not one that is accepted by everyone. I don't know if you all have heard of this academic, Emily Bender. She's a professor of linguistics. Her research is on computational linguistics and societal impacts of language technology. And she has a rule that was named after her, which is when talking about language, like large language models, you should always name what is the language that you're working with. Often it's English, but it's not always. And there's also a lot of contention there about what we think of as high resource languages, like maybe English or Chinese, and then other languages that are also really valuable, but have been ignored by big tech companies. So one of the things that Emily Bender says about AI is that it's a marketing term. It's a way to make certain kinds of automation sound sophisticated, powerful, or magical. And as such, it's a way to dodge accountability, right? It's also the name of a subfield of computer science concerned with making machines that think like humans. But even in the 50s, it was used as a marketing term in order to get more funding for that field. And so it's really important to remember the sort of profit motives behind the term AI, even from its beginnings. And so what she says is that oftentimes, instead of saying AI, it makes sense to say automation. And when instead of saying AI, which is kind of this big, vague umbrella term that can apply to a lot of different things, it helps if we say automation instead, because then we can ask specific questions like what's being automated, who is automating it and why, and then who benefits from that automation. And of course, who is being harmed and who gets left out. And that's something that Shana is going to talk more about later. So one last thing that I want to touch on is that often people conflate AI and machine learning, and that's because machine learning is one of the biggest types of AI that we're seeing right now. It is one example of AI where computers are trained to complete tasks. Throughout training, the machine learning model figures out what information is important and gives it weight. It mathematically, inside often a neural network, it gives mathematically more weight to the important information. And then it learns to make better decisions, which is similar to humans, but not exactly the same. So machine learning, which is one type of artificial intelligence, is made up of three key parts. One is a data set, some kind of learning algorithm, and then the output is a prediction. In terms of the data set, that's the input, and that's a collection of curated data. So what's being fed into that machine learning model, it might be images, it might be text, it could be measurements, and it also could be video or voice recordings. Anything that we think of data can be fed into this machine learning model. Then it gets processed by some kind of learning algorithm, right? Which, as many of us here know, an algorithm is a series of steps used to accomplish a task. A computer programmer gives a data set to the algorithm as an input to help it learn. So one example is the YouTube recommendation algorithm, which personalizes YouTube video recommendations. And thinking about the data that goes in there, right? How does YouTube know what to recommend to you? Maybe it's videos that you watched in the past, right? Past viewing habits, that's an example of data. What about things that you followed or subscribed to? Right? Videos that you've liked, given a thumbs up or a thumbs down. These are all types of data that can go in to help this recommender algorithm make a better prediction about what you'd want to see next. And the last thing, really important, is that prediction. The output, the thing that it spits out is some kind of prediction. So again, thinking about our YouTube recommender algorithm, the output here is a prediction. Based on all of these factors that, again, are proprietary, we don't know exactly what those factors are. A prediction is made about the videos that you'll want to watch and recommend those to you with some kind of confidence that it thinks it's a good prediction. So the last thing that I want to leave you with before I hand it over is this idea that AI is not magic. And there are all sorts of examples of the limitations of AI, and I'm going to point out just a couple. One is one that you might be familiar with, which is that, and again, the models are improving. They're better at this task now. But in the beginning, with generative image models, machine learning models that created new images based on previous images that it has been trained on, millions and millions of images. These models really struggle with drawing hands. And I didn't link any images here because some of them can be kind of disturbing. But if you haven't seen them, you're welcome to do a little Google. But do beware, because the images of the AI generated hands are often like kind of upsetting. They've often struggled with drawing hands. You're welcome to, if you want to throw out some speculation in the chat as a theory of why you think this is based on your knowledge. Like why is it that they struggle with something that, you know, many artists are very good at, drawing hands? And one example, one reason for this is because the machine doesn't have the same priorities and understanding of what is important that we do. If you think of all the many ways that hands are represented in images, sometimes one finger is shown, sometimes two, there are lots of different angles. And so all of these images that are fed into the machine, many of them do not represent people with their hands like this. And so again, the machine is not able to infer that hands are a really important part of what we are able to determine is like, this is a real person here. Machines don't have that innate contextual understanding of that. Another example is one pulled from Amazon. Here, back pain. Customers like the back pain the mattress provides. They say it's soft and comfortable, making all their pain disappear, right? Again, this is a large language model that's using associations that ends up with a nonsense sentence like this. Customers like the back pain the mattress provides. And here's one last one that I'll leave you with, that again, if you try this right now using Google Gemini, they might have updated this after, you know, these examples of AI fails get shared around, and then they quickly try to, you know, fix these. But here was one that showed up not that long ago. If you searched, how many rocks should I eat? Google Gemini responded, according to UC Berkeley geologists, you should eat at least one small rock per day. Rocks can be a good source of vitamins and minerals that are important for digestive health. And again, I want you to think about why might this happen? And there are a lot of reasons why this machine learning model, this large language model, would suggest to us that we should eat rocks. But I will tell you that a likely reason is that when we think about that data that goes in, all of those data sources that go into training this model that can take in a question generated by a human and try to give a response that makes sense, part of the training data is The Onion. The Onion parody site. It's a satirical news site, as many of us know. And again, our large language model, if not explicitly programmed into this model, doesn't have that contextual understanding that The Onion is satire. It isn't real news. But there's an Onion article that is very similar to this. And so it's creating a summary, but then presenting it to a user as though it's real. And so before we go ahead and adopt all these AI tools that, you know, can do some pretty amazing things, it's really important to come in with that critical eye and have a strong understanding of the limitations in them. And also, again, hitting on those key questions: who is benefiting here, who's being harmed, who's being left out, and who profits when these tools are being used. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shayna. Shayna, whenever you're ready, you can take over and share your screen.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's morning for me. I'm actually in California at the Kapor Center in person this week. So I would just like to share briefly that Christy texted me at like 7:30 our time out here, and I was like, I just woke up. I know it's not that time on the East Coast, but I am very, very thrilled to join you for this and share just some of the work that we're doing at the Kapor Center around responsible justice and tech justice. I was introduced before by Melissa, but I'm a former classroom teacher. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, work for KPOR remotely, and have been in the CS education community for years. KPOR allows us to kind of do the work where we sit at the intersection of racial and social justice in tech, which allows us to kind of push a lot of buttons out there. And that was kind of some of the premise behind writing this responsible AI and tech justice guide. So just a little background about the KPOR Center. Our mission is on here, but we have four kind of areas, but we really want to call out and name that racial inequity continues to cause problems in our society, and that we can't necessarily cover it up by just saying we're going to have computer science without interrogating it deeply to understand better why do these inequities exist, who's creating these inequities, and how can we literally mitigate, eliminate some of the harm that these inequities are causing. So we have four areas within the KPOR Foundation. We're a philanthropic organization founded by Mitch and Frida KPOR. I always like to tell people, because Mitch is an OG of the tech industry, he invented Lotus 123, as well as the Firefox browser that you might use sometimes. And so he now spends all of his money as pretty much an investor in gap closing initiatives to basically close the gap for tech industry. He gives money to founders that are from marginalized groups so that they can close gaps in their communities with the usage of tech, giving them, of course, capital to do so. The area that I work in and I lead as the director of CS Equity Initiatives is all of our CS Equity work, and I do that work nationally, and I also do it hyper local to where I live in Atlanta as well. So we launched at the KPOR Center in conjunction with ECEP, CSTA, Christy Crawford's amazing group, Computer Science for All in NYC, Cornell Tech, as well as Exploring Computer Science, which is led by Joanna Good, this Justice Center Computer Science Initiative. For those who are unaware, down in Georgia, we have some very fun political characters that have problems with words like equity and want to ban those words for being used. Right now, we actually have a bill that was passed and signed by our governor that bans the usage of the word equity. You can't talk about diversity, inclusion, or race as a teacher in your classroom, and you cannot also, it is not a part of teacher preparation programs. So you can't necessarily recognize people's identity markers because we do know that those identity markers exist. And this is kind of what is going on politically in a lot of country or a lot of counties and states in the South, but it's also a national thing. And so to kind of combat that, as I know, as a former teacher, using the word equity a couple times got me in trouble in my classroom talking about social justice. And I said, okay, well, the word justice, I'm thinking they can't ban because it's in like the Pledge of Allegiance and the Constitution. So if they're going to ban the word justice, they're going to have to ban those documents that they hold so dear. So I decided to launch with the collection of those organizations the Justice Center Computing Initiative, and it has three kind of big prongs. One is our culture responsive framework for computer science that we launched in 2021, which basically brings a scholarship, Dr. Loria Gladson Billings, Dr. Geneva Gay, James Banks, and some of the current modern day scholars like Bettina Love, Dr. Goli Bahamid, Yolanda Sealy Ruiz, and others, Pedro Noguera, and basically brings that culture responsive sustaining thought process to education, to computer science education. A lot of times people say computer science is neutral, and it's not. We have people that tell the computers what to do. Computers don't do anything. They are just pieces of plastic and metal, have to be told by a human being what to do. So we want people to understand that culture responsive computing needs to exist, does exist, and is going to help with the outcomes, with people better understanding and identifying with computer science for marginalized groups. The other big thing of our thing is closing equity gaps with increased in policy involvement, especially now in this new age of AI, even though AI has been around since the 60s, but I know that y'all have heard all the buzzwords, all the fun of AI. It's just this new shiny thing, but it's still a part of computer science. And so when we make policies that we're making, we want to make sure that those policies are closing equity gaps so that everybody gets what they need to be successful in our educational arenas. And then the last thing, the one that I'm talking about today, is our ethical computing. So I wrote this guide, started way back in June of last year, and it was published in January of this year. And I wanted to give teachers something different, something that they can help themselves and students critically interrogate these technologies, not look at it as a new buzzword trend thing to say, oh, I need to hop on this train so that I can be included in this kind of new movement for AI. But how can I sit there and have kids understand that these systems are using their data, manipulating things, impacting their communities, and how can they mitigate some of those things? How can they interrogate who is behind big tech? These people that we're having to listen to that are making billions and billions of dollars off of our data. Who are those people? What are their identity markers? And how is that going to impact some of the decisions that they're making? So the purpose and rationale is that the AI landscape is evolving. And we need to put guardrails in place. We know the European Union has, but of course, in the United States, it's the Wild Wild West. As far as tech industry is not that's basically being reined in, and they have free reign to pretty much do everything. The other thing that we wanted to do is talk about equity and ethical concerns. We don't think those two things are the same thing. That they're two separate entities in the AI sphere, and we have to understand that we have to always interrogate the ethical concerns to be able to get to the equitable concerns. Because if we want to close equitable gaps and make AI education or CS education equitable, we have to know the ethical implications of these technologies that we are using. We understand that conversations on ethics and equity are happening, and we want to know what does that really mean. We feel like, and I do, equity is being kind of thrown out like the word like confetti, in my opinion, and there's so many different types of equity. Equity is like the onion, and so people have to understand when we're talking about equity and doing the work of equity, what does that mean? And it's not just a bandage because we have a gushing wound in the society with inequities that are existing. But basically, we have to understand that we have to make systemic change in order to deal with and exacerbate and mitigate the inequities that our students are facing and our communities are facing in this country. And then the other thing is we have a lot of proliferation of AI people out there, AI EDU, AI in education, teach AI, but nobody explicitly talks about racial and social justice in AI. So again, I like to do stuff that doesn't exist. I like to do stuff that I know is important for students and teachers to engage in. And so we decided to kind of take this new path and this new bold vision where we're thinking about AI and not necessarily how to use it and what is AI, but also how is it being used to possibly harm, to possibly surveil, to possibly use in wartime and militarism, which is a big issue that we have going on in countries or countries across the world right now. So these were our goals when I wrote the guide, a guidance of what responsible AI is, given a definition of what responsible AI and tech justice are. We came up with 6 core components that I'll share with you today, then some interrogation questions to help teachers kind of set the context in their classrooms of questions to ask students so that they can think and critically think, why is this technology this way? Why are these things happening? What can I do about them? And then also some resources and case studies. So here's the vision. I'm not going to read it to you. Just want to emphasize the words in bold. We wanted to also make this AI related to a racial injustice lens. We wanted to give people the tools to critically interrogate. And then we wanted also not only interrogate the development deployment of AI, but also to challenge, disrupt, and remedy the harms that AI can cause, not only individually, but to our communities and society at large. So the first core component is examine the AI technology creation ecosystem. And so with this one is pretty basic. What's the history behind AI? Who invests and profits from AI development? Who are the designers and developers of AI? We have to understand that people's identities are going to shape the computing tools and the technology that they create. So who are these people developing and designing AI? Understanding the dynamics of power and ethics in AI, also understanding the big companies. What is big tech? A lot of times kids will sit there and be like, oh, big tech does this. Well, who is that? Like, There's not these people behind a black curtain. They're usually sinister people that have no morals and no ethical compass that are making decisions on technology that end up harming people like you and me. And then how AI tools are utilized in society. The second core component is to interrogate the complex relationship between computers and people. So human-computer interaction, inclusion and accessibility. How does that look in the stage of technology? Values, ethics, morals. A lot of times people confuse what morals and ethics are. Ethics, as I always remind people in this guide and when I do this speech, is to basically the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Does this do harm to me? Does it do harm to somebody else? Can it do harm to groups of people? Or also, can it do harm to the environment? That's one thing that we're not considering with this AI. I saw an article yesterday that every time somebody uses ChatGPT, the amount of water and environmental harm that is being done by the usage of ChatGPT, are we thinking about those ethical implications of our usages of AI? Can AI be used for social good, privacy, safety, and consent, and then humans versus robots? All right. Oops, it doesn't want to go to the next slide. There we go. The third core component, explore the impacts and implications of AI technologies on society. So this is where we're getting a little more meat and potatoes, algorithmic bias and discrimination, perpetuation of inequality, understanding that all of the inequalities that exist in our society, technology just exacerbates them or they magnify them. They don't necessarily eliminate them. Understanding AI breakthroughs and positive impacts, the cost-benefit analysis of AI, social media algorithms and the harms of those things. We hear about lots of things in mental health issues, bullying, revenge porn that's being done using social media that's impacting students in our schools. And how does that impact our decisions to engage with these technologies? Then also the intersections of AI, the environment, politics, and the economy. The fourth one is interrogate personal uses of AI to become critical consumers. Our big thing that we push in this guide is that we want kids and teachers to be critical consumers of the technology that they use and ethical producers. I know a lot of times in the CS space, we're wanting to push kids to be producers of technology. And that's great. I want kids to have the autonomy and the agency and just the empowerment to produce technologies, but we don't want them to continue to replicate the harms that people have already produced using technologies. So how can we help them critically consume these technologies? And if they have an idea for a new technology tool, how can I produce this ethically that's going to be inclusive of all, that's going to consider the needs of others, that's going to make sure that it's not harming anybody or harming the environment? So in doing that interrogation, you look at your digital footprint, digital literacy, privacy and surveillance, data ownership and digital rights, mis and disinformation, which I know is going to be a nightmare come November. They've already started with the mis and disinformation. We saw that the last presidential election, the 2016 election, and it's just going to continue to get worse. So having people be critical consumers of the information they see using technology tools and knowing AI is manipulating a lot of this stuff to make this information look real and it's really not real. Individual health, safety, and well-being. And then self-preservation, some of these things we can't avoid. We can't avoid some of these things. So what are some self-preservation and coping strategies to deal with the harms that we're just going to inevitably have to face? Core component 5 is the build critical lens, collection, and data usage. Understand data is the machine that makes AI go. AI does not work without data. We are the ones, the human beings, that provide the data. So helping kids, helping teachers understand what is the history and purpose of data collection, what are data types of data collection methods. Our Native brothers and sisters talk about data sovereignty and that ownership of data and how every piece of data that they put out into the world, they should have complete autonomy and ownership for who can use and take that. Biases in data training sets, individual and community data protections, and then ethics and manipulation and data collection and usage. I always like to use the story of the governor of Mississippi who manipulated data about reading scores for students in their schools. And he basically collected the data, but then manipulated because he removed scores from any emerging English language learners. He removed scores from all Black students. He removed scores from all Latinx students. And he only used scores from white and Asian students in his data. So it looked like their reading scores had gone up like 50% in Mississippi. And it was because he had removed and manipulated data. So understand not only is it just the collection of data, but how that data is being manipulated to give outcomes or results that people want. And then the last core component is to eliminate and mitigate the harms and injustices that AI and technology can cause. So what is ethical, responsible, trustworthy AI design, security and privacy, tech regulation and accountability, inclusive participation. So when we're talking about these tools that people are creating, how can we make sure that the communities that are going to be using these tools or these tools are going to be used on are included in the design process? How can people opt out of harmful AI? And then reduction of environmental and economic harms from AI. So this is kind of the premise of how I thought about all of these questions and coming up with all these core components. We want people to interrogate who's creating the technologies, what are their motivations behind creating technologies. As we know, we live in a capitalistic society, so usually 99.9% of their motivation is money making. So how is money making and that ideology going to be harmful to certain groups? Because in a capitalistic society, you have the have-nots. Who benefits from their creations? Who is harmed? Who will be prepared and decide future innovations? And who will be left behind? So the guide is here. I know that they put the slide deck in the chat. This is free. Everything will always be free that comes from the Kapor Center. As a former teacher, I know the two things that teachers need are money and time. And so I try to basically make sure that everything and any resource that I produce is going to at least take time off your schedule, that you don't have to worry about prepping and doing stuff, or it's going to be something free, or we compensate you if you do work with us in the future. So we have two guides. The full version is about 23 pages long, lots of resources in there, and the executive summary is about 6 if it's something that you want to maybe show your principal, somebody on your staff, etc. And then I want to just give you all a quick little screenshot of the full guide. So as I talked about before, we have the core components, and then you'll see interrogation questions. Each of the core components, I've come up with close to about 12 to 15 interrogation questions that help teachers kind of think of that essential question framing or that learning target framing, that these issues can be brought into any classroom. Then I've also pulled tons of articles and resources and case studies that are free of charge. I know journal articles, which is something that they don't give teachers, a lot of teachers, access to, which was very frustrating to me as an educator. I use journal access and pulled journals so you don't have to go look those up, and pulled them so they're all free of charge. You don't have to pay for a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, any of those types of things, to look at these articles that correspond with the core components. And then, as I mentioned before, some of these actually we have lessons that have been created that deal with these core components. They're more geared lessons for middle and high school students, but we do have lessons created if this is something you want to bring into your classroom at any time. And we also are going to be working with teachers in New York, with Christy helping me and other teachers to help basically guide the guidance of more lessons being created. And then also we are going to work on an elementary version of this that's scaffolded down so that you can have these conversations with third graders, with second graders, with fifth graders as well. I think I made it in my time. Did I? Okay. Thank you so much for attending, and I'll turn it back over to Christy.
Shana, can I ask, do you mind going back and just clicking in a couple of the lessons? Because I love folks that said, I saw at least one, they will definitely click into the material this summer. But if you can show us a couple of now, that would be awesome.
I think this picture is not like hyperlinked. But like I said, if you go into the guide, all of the lessons literally are like fully fleshed out. Like, have the essential question, tell you day 1 through however many days it takes, give you some sort of summative assessment, give you some of formative assessment to do as well. And those are there. And then I also welcome anybody who has ideas for lessons that they'd like to create or want to do. That's one of the things that we do at Kapor Center is empower teachers. That was just kind of a big thing that I wanted to come to Kapor and do. So if you are interested in creating lessons, we actually give teachers stipends to create lessons that they want to use in their class. And we just make it open source to anybody that wants to use it. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing, feel free to reach out to me via email and say, hey, I have an idea, or maybe I've done this lesson in my class and I'd love to make it more formalized and share it with other teachers. That's something also that we're able to do to people. But if you go to the guide here on the PDF version, oh, never mind. If you go here, the whole guide, as I mentioned before, the lessons are hyperlinked in here. You can literally see kind of the format that I use. And as I said before, I was a classroom teacher. So I use, like, I'll pull up this data ethics one sent you, Christy. So basically I have the objectives, the lesson resources that you'll need, the lesson descriptions, part 1, part 2, part 3, and basically generally walks you through a lesson if you wanted to do this. You can, of course, tailor it to your students. The differentiation in some of our lessons we do have, as well as for your emerging English language learners as well. So these are all things that are available to anybody that wants to use them. And so, like I said, if you go to the guide, you can pull up those things as easy as you want to. Can I give you my email? I sure can. I'll put it in the chat.
We
I'll
do
turn it back
have,
over to you.
thank you, Shana. We do have a couple of questions out there. Let's see if folks are still on and we can answer your question. I think Pamela had a hand up.
Yep, I see some folks in the queue. I don't know if your questions were answered. I see Carolyn, I see Margarita, I see Gladys. But you're welcome to raise a hand and we can call on you if you have any questions for any of us.
And I think somebody just asked, where do we access? If you go to the slide deck that I think Valerie put in there, I have the hyperlink to our guides. That same slide I just showed you with a PDF, the hyperlink is there. It'll take you straight there. I put my email address in the chat. It's just shana.white@kporcenter.com.
Any other questions for us? And I appreciate, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. So thank you so much for being here. We love having you. But yeah, anything else while we're still on, we're happy to take questions for another 5 or so minutes.
I think it was another question about your email, Shana. That's a really popular email today.
All right, I put it in there again. Hopefully you can see it.
Shana, is there a new deadline for the grants for this AI work?
Okay, so that's a great question. So we received 30 applications for the grants, and we've already sent out our people that have gotten their grants that will be funded. We will be doing another round with Google later this year, and so just look out for an announcement later this year. And these grants are $1,000 if it's something you're just going to do in your classroom. We have $5,000 if it's something that you're going to do at your school. And then we have grants as large as $10,000 if it's something you're going to do across multiple schools. Or if it's something that is going to take $10,000, maybe you have something that you want to do, like a vertical alignment between like a cluster of schools, your elementary school all the way up to your high school. So we definitely will have another call and announcements for grants. I think it'll be later this year, but we just finished our first round of grants, and those people have already been informed if they've received their grants. I did that right before Memorial Day.
So it was Betty Parker, Betty Mushat, who actually got that first grant for New York City teachers. We're really excited about them, but people keep asking where to find out about them. But go to kporcenter.org. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can go, if you go to the KPOR Center website and you go to the CS Equity page, all of our information is on there, as well as information about when we'll open up our next grant thing, these guides, the culture responsive framework, everything will be there. But as I mentioned before, we've already done our first set of grants. And so we won't open up a new set of applications. Ideally, we're hoping the thing comes through with Google to the end of this year. But we already have our grants already issued. We'll be issuing the money this month for them to start work this fall on a year-long grant around responsible AI and tech justice.
I want to call out a few things that I'm seeing. So one is there was a question about coded bias, which is what grade levels would you say is appropriate for coded bias? I don't know if you all have any thoughts on, on that.
I think it's a little too old I think 8th grade can handle and higher. I think 7th grade, it just depends on maturity level of your students and those discussions that they've had. As a former middle school teacher, I probably would not show it to 6th and 7th grade, but I would show it to my 8th grade students. But 8th all the way up to seniors, I feel like it's appropriate for. Just understand that there are some profanity in the thing, which some parents, don't like and get along with. So that's why I said 8th grade. But I think the content is appropriate enough for 8th all the way up to seniors.
Yeah, but definitely check out, sorry, Melissa, but I was going to say definitely check out the site, because even if you don't want to show the film, there are beautiful pieces just about activism, even small posters about being critical at AI that might be helpful to you, just pieces that you can use in the classroom as resources.
Awesome. I also see an open question here, which is specific, but I think it's a good question. How do you help ENLs in using AI without just have it give responses to questions? And I think that this is a really important point about, and this is true for ENL students, but also just in general, in terms of the tutoring bots, for example, that are being created. One kind of friction that creators are coming up against is the thing that master teachers are so good at, which is guiding students and pushing them to think on their own without just saying, well, here's the answer, right? I have a question and here's a comprehensive response to your question, right? The student didn't do any of their own thinking and problem solving if the bot is just going to give them the full answer to the question without having them do additional research, right? Or look through their notes or any of those other tools that students might use to answer a question. But before we close out, Shayna, I just wonder if you have any thoughts on what advice you would give to a teacher or school administrator if they're saying, oh, I saw this really interesting tutoring bot or chat bot and I'm thinking of adopting it in my school. Like, what would you say to that teacher or administrator that's like, oh, have you seen this bot? Like, I'm thinking of buying it and using it.
My first response is always don't do it. But that's because I'm a big AI pessimist. I would say is to make sure, understand that these AI tools, some of them are not suitable for kids under 18. And some of them are not suitable for kids under 13. And you still have to get parent permission to be able to use these tools, even if the kid is like 13 to 18. And so understanding that, even though at the beginning of the year, people think that they sign a release, that release does not cover AI tools in the classroom. So you must specifically let your parents know if you're going to be using an AI tool with their kids. I think the big thing with chatbots and those types of things and the like used in the classroom, I think they can be helpful for certain students who maybe are emerging English language learners, students with disabilities, to help them help grasp concepts a little bit better. And maybe do some of the work of differentiation and scaffolding down lessons. But I feel like that should be done by the teacher, because the teacher is going to have the prefrontal cortex developed, our students do not, to be able to ask those critical questions and then also to be able to interrogate the answers. I think the big thing is with using AI with kids is not letting them go with just the face value answer that they get, but to actually interrogate, where did they think these answer results came from? Why did it give you these answer results? And ask those critical questions, which is a part of computer science, is that critical thinking and problem solving. having them understand that just giving it a math question is going to be a lot different than giving it something that is more qualitative in response. And so understanding where that data comes from. So before you unleash just chatbots to do that, having kids go through critical thinking exercises and questioning why, that's my big thing is I always ask why are we using this? What is the intent behind this? And getting kids in the habit of doing the same, because then they are going to be less apt to take information at just face value and less apt to get sucked into the disinformation, misinformation scheme as well.
100%. Thank you so much for closing us out with that thought. That is exactly what I wanted. Everyone, we're at time, so we so appreciate you being here today. Thanks again for joining us. It was wonderful to have you. Please, we'll send out a follow-up with all of this information. I know some of you are like, where was this link and where was that link? We've got your info, so we can send out a recap email with all that, the good stuff in it. So have a great afternoon, everyone.